The dark legacy of the Salem witch trials. In the harsh winter of 1692, the quiet village of Salem, Massachusetts, was gripped by a terror far greater than starvation, disease, or the freezing winds outside. It began with whispers, accusations spoken in low voices around flickering candlelight. Neighbors pointed fingers at neighbors. Husbands accused wives. Children condemned their mothers. Within months, 20 people were dead. Hundreds were accused, and a town had torn itself apart. But here's the darkest truth of all. The Salem witch trials didn't begin with witches. It began with something far more human and far more chilling. The village of Salem in 1692 was not the Salem we know today. It was not a bustling tourist town with quaint shops and historical reenactments. It was a grim and isolated Puritan settlement, a place where life was ruled by fire and brimstone sermons, endless labor, and an ever-present fear of damnation. The people of Salem were not just living under strict religious rules. They were trapped by them. Anything outside the narrow path of Puritan doctrine was seen as sin. Reading a strange book? Sin. Dancing? Sin. Speaking out of turn? Sin. Now add to this simmering pot of guilt and anxiety 2 more ingredients: a bitter feud between the wealthiest families in town and a brutal winter that had pushed food stores dangerously low. The villagers began to ask themselves, what if someone wanted them to suffer? What if someone was working for the devil himself? It all started in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, the fiery and often unpopular minister of Salem Village. His young niece, Abigail Williams, and his daughter, Betty, began to act strangely. They screamed. They barked like dogs. They twisted their bodies into impossible shapes. And when doctors couldn't explain their afflictions, the villagers turned to the one answer they understood: witchcraft. Here's where things took a dangerous turn. Under pressure to name the source of their suffering, Abigail and Betty pointed their fingers at 3 women. Tituba, the enslaved Caribbean woman who worked in the Parris household. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar already despised by the community. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who hadn't attended church in years. It's worth pausing here to ask, why these 3 women? Because they were easy targets. They were outsiders, misfits, people no one would defend. When Tituba was questioned, she did something unexpected, something that would unleash chaos across Salem. She confessed. But Tituba didn't just confess to witchcraft. She told the court that there were more witches in Salem, and just like that, the floodgates opened. Accusations spread through Salem like wildfire. Children accused parents. Servants accused masters. Rivals settled old scores with a single damning word: witch. And the trials, they were a grotesque parody of justice. Evidence wasn't based on fact, but on something called spectral evidence. This meant that if someone claimed they'd seen your ghost or specter attacking them in a dream, you could be found guilty. Imagine that for a moment. No witnesses, no proof. Just the word of someone you may have offended, or someone who envied your land, your family, or your success. One of the accused, Martha Corey, laughed in court. She laughed. She said the very idea of witches was nonsense. But this only convinced the judges that the devil was speaking through her. Another woman, Rebecca Nurse, was a respected elderly matriarch. Her neighbors had loved her. Yet, when she was accused, their loyalty crumbled. In court, her deafness was taken as defiance, and her innocence was drowned out by screaming. And the punishments? They were brutal. Giles Corey, an 81-year-old farmer, refused to enter a plea when he was accused. To force a confession, the authorities placed heavy stones on his chest, one by one, until the weight crushed the life out of him. His last words? More weight. These weren't witches. These were people, mothers, fathers, children, all swallowed by a madness they couldn't escape. By September 1692, the executions had stopped, but only because the madness had begun to turn on itself. When the governor's own wife was accused of witchcraft, it became clear this hysteria could destroy anyone. In total, 20 innocent people were executed, 19 hanged, and 1 crushed to death. 4 others died in jail awaiting trial. Over 200 more were accused. Years later, the courts admitted their mistakes. They declared the trials unlawful, paid reparations to the families, and even held a day of public fasting and reflection. But for those who had witnessed the chaos, there was no way to erase what had happened. The Salem witch trials were not about witches. They were about fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of outsiders. Fear of the very human tendency to blame someone else when life goes wrong. It's a story that feels old, outdated, a relic of another time. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The Salem witch trials are not just a piece of history. They are a mirror. How many times, even now, do we see fear and suspicion spiral out of control? How many times do we look for scapegoats when things go wrong? The names have changed. The stories have changed, but the lesson of Salem remains. As you sit here, safe in your home, imagine this. You're living in Salem, 1692. You hear a knock at the door, and outside stands your neighbor, someone you've known for years. But this time, they're not holding a basket of bread. They're pointing at you, and they're saying, "Witch." If that sends a chill down your spine, good. Because that's the shadow Salem left behind, and it's a shadow that still follows us today. Thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe.